It begins with a low hum over water and a glow too orange to be dawn. A refinery flares, then another. Loading buoys bob in black seas, quiet until the moment they aren't. And while envoys shuffle draft ceasefires across polished tables, Ukraine plays a different hand, turning valves, spiking premiums, and forcing calculators to do the screaming. As envoys draft ceasefires, Zelensky shows cards Putin can't ignore. Back in November, the tempo wasn't just up, it was unprecedented. Ukrainian long-range drones hit Russian refineries at least 14 times in a single month, the highest tally since the full-scale invasion began. Add 4 attacks on oil loading facilities, and explosions involving tankers, and the map of Russia's energy network looked like a constellation with half the stars on fire. That headline isn't rumour, it's written in dispatches and burn scars. The crescendo rolled into the Black Sea. Naval drones surged toward Novorossiysk and slammed the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's offshore terminal, one of 3 single-point moorings that let supertankers drink crude straight from shore. The CPC publicly acknowledged the damage. SPM-2 was hit badly enough that further operation is not possible. Loadings halted and ships were waved out of the water. Within days, limited exports limped back through a single working buoy while a third remained under repair. The image was stark, a jugular line running on one pulse. Kazakhstan, which leans on CPC for more than 4/5 of its crude exports, scrambled to reroute barrels into the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan line. It's a workable detour, but a narrow one. Aktau's port capacity caps volumes, blending specs matter, and every extra mile adds cost. Reuters tallied the pivot and the bottlenecks cleanly. CPC briefly halted, then restarted at reduced capacity, while Astana pushed an extra 188,000 metric tons through BTC to cushion the blow. You could hear the terminal's strain in the trade chatter. Energy Aspects said exports were effectively halved right after the strike. CPC raced to bring the still under repair mooring back early to restore normal flows. A system designed with redundancy was suddenly living without it, the maritime equivalent of plugging one nostril and trying to run a marathon. If the Black Sea felt jumpy, the insurance market felt jumpier. After Ukrainian naval drones tagged 2 sanctioned tankers headed toward Novorossiysk, war risk premiums for a standard 7-day voyage ticked higher almost overnight. Calls to Ukrainian ports rose from roughly 0.4% to 0.5% of whole value. Russian port cover bumped from approximately 0.6% to 0.65% to 0.8%. That's a 20 to 30% jump on the surcharge, and for an old, high-value shadow fleet hull, those basis points are real money. Brokers call it repricing exposure. Captains call it, please, not that lane again. Moscow tried to bark the risk back down. Putin rattled the saber, threatening to cut Ukraine off from the sea if tanker strikes continued, while Turkey huddled with NATO over Black Sea safety after hits near its waters and even as far away as Senegal made insurers sweat. But rhetoric doesn't move spreadsheets. Rates moved anyway. Inside Russia, the refinery map kept blinking. Lukoil's Volgograd plant, which processed 13.7 million tons last year, halted after a drone barrage torched its CDU-5 and a hydrocracker in early November. Rosneft shuttered crude processing after another strike, a replay in a facility that has had to stop and start more than once this year. These aren't nuisance fires. These are core units, distillation and cracking, knocked offline and forced into complex repairs. That matters beyond the fence line. The International Energy Agency's ledgers have been clear for months. Russian crude and product exports in May ran about 380,000 barrels per day below the prior year's pace, roughly a 5% decline year on year, while product flows later fell to multi-year lows as refineries absorbed repeated shocks. In October, the IEA put export revenues at $13.1 billion, down $2.3 billion from the same month a year earlier. By late November, Reuters math pointed to state oil and gas revenues dropping around 35% year on year. It's a pile-up of small cuts into a big bruise. Now put a number on that Black Sea bruise. Before the strike, CPC blend exports were slated at roughly 1.7 million barrels per day in December, up from about 1.45 million in November. Brent has been hovering near the low $60. If a single moorings loss constrains throughput by even approximately 20% over a month, conservative given the immediate halving and slow ramp, bar napkin math says you shave on the order of $500 million of gross revenue out of the stream. 1 month, 1 terminal, 1 broken buoy. It's not a precision audit, it's a credible scale. Meanwhile, the shadow fleet that keeps sanctioned barrels moving is paying more to do the same job. A 0.6% war risk surcharge, nudging to 0.75%, doesn't sound dramatic until you price a $60 million Suezmax. That's an extra $90,000 for a week's cover before you layer on crew bonuses, route deviations, and the "this lane just got spicier" fee quietly tacked on by risk-averse owners. Multiply that across dozens of lifts, and the margin turns thin enough to read newsprint through. There's an irony markets won't admit out loud. While Ukraine demonstrated it can make oil expensive to move, oil itself has been cheap to buy. Brent has slid into the low 60s on oversupply fears and soft demand, even as the Black Sea grew louder. Peace rumors pulled prices down, drone wakes pushed them up. For now, bears have the chart. That disconnect lets Kyiv squeeze Moscow's netbacks without spiking the global pump. It's a pressure point that doesn't punish allies. The diplomatic backdrop is its own drama. President Donald Trump's envoys, developer Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner, just logged nearly 5 hours with Putin in the Kremlin. Moscow called the talks constructive. There was no breakthrough and no details. And the White House softened a self-imposed deadline as European capitals rolled their eyes. Whatever the text says now, the subtext is clearer. Negotiations are happening under the steady thump of Ukrainian drones. This is the contrast Kyiv is writing into every skyline flare. As envoys draft ceasefires, Zelensky shows cards Putin can't ignore. A quiet month on the front can't erase a loud month in the offshore loading queue. And each time a refinery CDU goes cold or a mooring gets tagged, the Kremlin's margin for a comfortable peace narrows. You can dispute the politics. You can't dispute the invoices. Of course, Moscow insists the system bends but never breaks. Spare capacity exists, rail cars move, Belarus refines, and somewhere a regional governor swears domestic stations will stay stocked. Those claims are true in the narrow sense and false in the strategic one. Russia can route around a cut wire. It cannot route around a campaign that turns wires into targets and downtime into doctrine. November's tally, 14 refinery strikes, wasn't a spike. It was a stress test. It measured Russian resilience and found a curve. The CPC hit translated test bench leverage into live fire leverage. Cut one buoy, watch an export system cough. Cut it again, watch allies of convenience complain. Kazakhstan publicly scolded Kiev while quietly booking more BTC space. Allies don't like surprises, but they like being collateral even less. On the Russian side, Volgograd and Ryazan are case studies in cumulative pain. Knocking out CDU-5 at Volgograd and suspending crude runs at Ryazan doesn't only dent export math, it twists domestic product logistics, forces interregional swaps, and absorbs maintenance crews who were already cannibalizing for sanctioned parts. Each outage leaves a shadow in the schedule, a unit that comes back slower, a catalyst that spent too long at temperature, a pipeline batch that missed its window. Zoom back to the sea and you find the strike on insurance had another echo, chartering appetite. Several operators pressed pause on Russia-related movements, Turkey convened calls, and underwriters updated blacklists so fast a few had to recharge their pens. It sounds fussy, but this is how maritime commerce thinks, via checklists, corridors, and exclusions. When those change, volumes follow. Markets are watching all this with that cynical shrug only traders can master. Revenues down year on year? Yes. Exports wobbly? Yes. Prices still soft? Also yes. The IEA's October and November notes cut straight to the point. Revenues slid, volumes nudged lower, product flows hit multi-year troughs, even as crude shipments oscillated with refinery downtime. It's a messy picture, but in the mess, one pattern holds. Ukraine can create oil market friction faster than Russia can find grease. So what's the game exactly? It's not about starving the world of oil. It's about turning Russia's oil revenues into a choppy stream. Interruptions, premiums, quality blending headaches, and just enough fear to make each voyage slightly more expensive than the last. Taken together, those shavings add up to budgets that don't stretch, to governors who don't sleep, and to generals who read the fuel table twice before signing the next offensive's timetable. And the CPC case makes the accounting feel very real. Call it single point misery. One buoy out, one under repair, and suddenly, a pipeline that moves more than 1% of global supply is juggling berthing slots like a short-staffed restaurant. Energy Aspects said the immediate effect was halved exports. CPC promised faster repairs. Kazakhstan found detours. The headline faded, the lesson didn't. If you're wondering why global prices didn't leap at the sight of moorings on fire, you're not alone. The paradox is timing. A soft macro picture and OPEC Plus output choices have kept Brent in a low gear, masking the cash flow bite on Russia. That's precisely why Kyiv is content to keep tapping the same nerve. The world shrugs, Moscow doesn't. It's a neat trick. One eye on the refinery stack, one eye on the bond auction. And then there's the politics. The peace push has real momentum. Vitkov and Kushner toured capitals and carried revisions. Europeans counter-drafted and grumbled. Kyiv waited and warned. After that 5-hour Kremlin session ended without a deal, critics accused Putin of feigning interest. The longer the texts circulate without signatures, the more valuable Ukraine's pressure becomes, because pressure is the only language that consistently gets a response. None of this means Russia folds. It still has mass, stockpiles, and a high pain threshold. But mass doesn't protect moorings, stockpiles don't restart a cooked hydrocracker, and pain thresholds don't pay for new distillation trays under sanctions. Strategy is increasingly the art of making the other side do math they don't like. In November and now into December, Kyiv picked the right math. On the Ukrainian side, the tactics are as modern as they are ruthless. Long-range UAVs with modular warheads stock stacks beyond air defense umbrellas. Maritime drones ride low sea states to pounce on infrastructure no one designed to fight back. It's innovation by necessity, and it trades air power Kiev doesn't have for effects the Kremlin can't ignore. On the Russian side, the counter is an expensive mix of redundancy, dispersion, and luck. Extra air defense regiments to guard refineries that sit far from the front. More decoys, more jammers, more patrols along pipelines that run across a continent. And at sea, more escort craft and more no-go polygons around the very moorings that make the export machine hum. The price tag grows, the vulnerability remains. The November data point, the record 14 refinery strikes, will be the line historians underline, because it marked a shift from sporadic harassment to sustained operational strategy. The CPC hit turned that strategy into a message legible to any finance minister. Even if you replace every broken flange, each month, we can still raise your cost of doing business. To keep the ledger honest, look at the revenue columns. October's oil export take fell to $13.1 billion, down sharply year on year. November's state oil and gas revenue likely slid around 35%. June's year-on export volumes were off roughly 5%. Product flows have been at multi-year lows when refineries swallow the damage. Individually, none of these wins a war. Together, they crowd the margins that finance one. And yes, prices are soft. That's the punchline. Brent's hovering around the low 60s in early December. If you're Kiev, that's permission to keep going. You're not spiking your friends' fuel bills while you're spiking your enemy's maintenance budget. You're turning a global commodity into a local headache. It turns out balance sheets have front lines too. Russia will counter with familiar tools. budget tweaks, export tax adjustments, refinery prioritization, and patriotic appeals. It will swear that domestic fuel is secure and that exports will recover. Some weeks they will. Others, a buoy will be down, a CDU will be cold, and a tanker will be late because a crew demanded hazard pay to cross a certain box on the chart. Strategy isn't always about decisive battles. Sometimes it's about deciding how often the other guy has to say, "Sorry for the delay." Which loops us back to that negotiating table. The text drafts will keep circulating. Versions will leak, critics will howl, and a fresh round of almost there headlines will flash. But the real edits are happening at night across the Black Sea and deep inside Russia. Each outage, each reroute, each 20 to 30% bump in war risk premiums is a tracked change in the document both sides are actually reading. Ukraine has made economics kinetic. November's peak, 14 refinery hits, proved the method. December's follow-through, the CPC mooring out, insurance repriced, refineries still nursing wounds, proved the endurance. Russia's oil exports are running lower than a year ago. Revenues are down, and the shadow that used to sail cheap now sails dear. If Putin wants terms he can live with, he has to solve problems he can no longer ignore. If you prefer your strategy with a little poetry, think of it this way. The war's most influential front isn't only a trench in Donetsk, it's a loading arm swaying in the Black Sea, a pump that won't start in Volgograd, a CDU cooling in Ryazan, and a spreadsheet in Moscow where the numbers won't sit still. As envoys draft ceasefires, Zelensky shows cards Putin can't ignore. And somewhere, far from the cameras, a drone draws a line under the total and makes sure everyone reads it twice. And if you're still thinking this is a distant problem, consider this final image. A buoy that most people never knew existed becomes the most important object in Europe for 48 hours. A spreadsheet dictates strategy. A drone, low on the water, decides a paragraph in a peace plan. Welcome to modern warfare, where the refinery stack is a signal flare, and the quiet click of an underwriter's mouse can sound like thunder.